Good morning. It's good to see you. Turn with me, please, to Exodus chapter 5. Exodus chapter 5. I had mentioned a few weeks ago that we were going to spend some time talking about the Exodus from now through the end of the year, just sprinkling in some discussions about the Exodus and some of the events surrounding the Exodus. And this morning we're going to talk about some things that go on in chapter 5 and chapter 6. And let's do this kind of collectively. We'll look at it and feel free to make comments and anything you want to say or any question you want to ask about it. The section that I really want us to focus in on is the response that the leaders of the people, of the Hebrews, have after Moses goes to Pharaoh and says to Pharaoh, verse 1, "Let my people go." So you tell me, we'll start this way. You tell me, what is the response of Pharaoh when Moses goes to him first and says, "Let my people go"? What does Pharaoh say? Why should I do that? Yeah, why in the world should I do that? In fact, he goes on and he says, "I don't even know the Lord. Who is the Lord that I should let my people go?" What is that? What is his question saying? Who is the Lord that I should let the people go? What's he saying? I'm in charge. He's not in charge. I don't recognize his authority. He's no one to me. And I'm not going to do what he says to do. And so that's the way verse 2 ends. I will not let Israel go. I'm not going to do it. And so then, the way things develop is Pharaoh is offended by the arrogance of Moses even bringing this up. And what does Pharaoh do? He increases the workload, right? He makes things more difficult for Israel, for the Hebrews. It says in verse 5 that Pharaoh said, "Look, the people of the land are many now, and you would have them cease from their labors." So the same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters over the people and their foremen, saying, verse 7, "You are no longer to give the people straw to make bricks as previously. Let them go and gather straw for themselves." You can imagine and kind of see the setup of this situation. The people are making bricks so they can make things, big buildings and whatnot. And so as that process goes on, Pharaoh's people are the ones that are providing the straw. Pharaoh says, "We're not doing that anymore. Get your own straw." Well, that becomes a significant change in the way they did their day-to-day business. Why did Pharaoh do that again? Why would he do that? He's showing them who's in charge. That's right. He is saying, "This is my show. I will make the rules. And if you want to tell me what to do, if you want to come in here and make requests of me, then I'll change the rules on you." Yes, sir.
And if you've got time to go worship your God, then obviously you've got too much time.
He gets into that. He says, if you have time to take time off and go do your thing, then, well, we're going to fill that time with work, and that's just the way it is. And he says the quota of bricks that you're supposed to make doesn't change. The output remains the same, but the work required to get the output is going to dramatically increase. Verse 10, so the taskmasters of the people and their foremen went out and spoke to the people, saying, Pharaoh says, "I'm not going to give you any straw." Moreover, verse 14, the foremen of the sons of Israel, whom Pharaoh had set over them, were beaten and were asked, "Why have you not completed your required amount either yesterday or today in making bricks as previously?" It wasn't just more difficult work. It was more difficult work with punishment attached, wasn't it? And so things were violent there. And the Hebrew Israelite foremen over their own brethren who were producing the bricks, they were the ones who were beaten because, well, they just couldn't keep up. So that's kind of the way the story develops. But then these foremen go back to Pharaoh and they say, "Well, this isn't going to work. This is not a good situation." And verse 17, Pharaoh says, "You are lazy, very lazy. Therefore you say, 'Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord.' So now go and work, for you will be given no straw, yet you must deliver the quota of bricks." The end result is Pharaoh's not budging, and he is showing them who's in charge. So what we really want to focus on now is their response to all of this. because there's some lessons for us, some things we can learn about how all of this works and helps us. So after Pharaoh says, I'm not giving you straw, you've got extra time on your hands, obviously, you're lazy, go do your job. After Pharaoh says that to them, what do? Who do they turn to? They turn to Moses. Verse 20, when they left Pharaoh's presence, they met Moses and Aaron as they were waiting for them. And they said to them, may the Lord look upon you and judge you, for you have made us odious in Pharaoh's sight and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to kill us. I don't know that I have used the word odious very often in my life. I don't think I have. I may have once or twice. What does that word mean? Anybody have a different? Repulsive. Abhorrent, repulsive, stink. Ooh, that's a bad word. Okay. Yeah. What are they saying to Moses and Aaron? Put it in your words today. Thanks for that. You have created a huge problem. You have messed everything up. Wait, who do they blame it on? Moses and Aaron. Yeah, that's who's taking the brunt of it. Moses and Aaron. Why did Moses and Aaron do that? Because God told them to. Yeah. So what they do is they have the Lord involved in their statement to Moses and Aaron, right? All right. So they say, may the Lord look upon you and judge you. Now, what does that mean? Say that another way. Yes, that's right. May you be the one who suffers and not us. May the Lord punish you. May the Lord recognize the damage you've done. May the Lord see that you have caused us more trouble. Do you think the Lord already knew all about that? You kind of think the Lord... Okay, what I want us to think about just a little bit is their perspective. These Hebrews' perspective on all of this. Because they get it wrong in verse 21. They absolutely get it wrong. Just like sometimes we get some things wrong. If we have time, we'll talk about some of them. But their perspective is, things haven't gone the way we wanted them to go. Our workload has been increased. Things are very unfair. We're now going to be beaten by Pharaoh. In fact, they indicate that things are going to get violent because, well, Pharaoh has given his taskmasters a sword, they say. So things are really going to be challenging, and it is your fault, Moses and Aaron. And may the Lord recognize that it's your fault. What are they getting wrong? Tell me some things that they're missing, some things that they're getting wrong here. Yeah, they're forgetting or not understanding that Aaron and Moses were doing exactly what God wanted done. They were doing exactly what God had told them to do. So is it the fault of, if we're going to assign blame from the Hebrews' perspective, is it the fault of Aaron and Moses? No, they're just doing what God said. Is there any valuable lesson for us there? Is there anything we can learn from that practically today in our lives? You can say yes, or you could tell me what some of those things are that we could learn. Yes, ma'am.
We might be talked to by somebody that sees us doing wrong in our life, and they tell us what we're doing, and or we tell them what's wrong, and they need to understand that it's not from a personal standpoint, that it's from what God has told us.
Okay. So there may be exchanges between us where one is trying to help and the other needs help, but we don't take the help properly. We get upset about that and blame the person, when in fact the truth they're telling us is God's truth. Okay. Paul said something to the Galatians, I believe I think it was chapter 4, was it? When he asked them a question. You remember one of the questions the Apostle Paul asked the Galatians? Yeah, have I become your enemy because I tell you the truth? Paul asked the Galatians that. Is it so that Aaron and Moses had, in this instance, become the enemy of these Hebrew foremen? In a sense, absolutely. They were doing what God said to do, and the folks did not like that. You and I will encounter that from time to time on two ways, just like Paul has said. Sometimes we may be the one trying to help, and our help is rejected, and folks get mad, they become angry at us, when in fact the truth we're trying to say is God's truth. That could happen. But what I have seen more often in my life is I am the one who gets angry when someone tries to help. I am the one who immediately kind of bristles and says, wait a minute now. When really all someone's trying to do is tell me God's truth as it relates to a circumstance in my life that I need to do better in. That's all it is. So how do we deal with that? How do we fix that? We can see it with them in verse 21. We really quickly see that they're mad at Moses and Aaron, but it's not Moses and Aaron that came up with all of this. We can see that. So how do we deal with that in our own lives? How can we manage that better? Okay, that's a really good one. We always want to deal with what is right instead of trying to decide who is right. Because when we get into the who is right, we get into subjective things. We get into feelings, we get into attitudes toward people. Personality is always at play, and that's not the point. The point is not who is right, the point is what is right, and then we begin to deal with that ourselves. If all of us individually dealt appropriately with what is right, then the who is right wouldn't be an issue. It just wouldn't be an issue if that's the focus. And so what they're looking at is what Moses and Aaron did that they don't like the result of, and so they're mad at Moses and Aaron, instead of backing up and saying, wait, God told them to do that. Now, what do we do when we back up and say, wait a minute, that's what God wanted done? What does that do for us? Yes, sir? Yeah, that creates a whole different attitude, right? A whole different perspective on things. When we back up and say, well, that's God's will, and we take personality completely out of it, we even take approach and attitude out of it. That's not an issue anymore because it's God's will. For example, if Joey comes to me to correct some behavior, to give me some pointers, to help me do better, and I recognize that it is God's truth that he's presenting, then how he presents the material or how he approaches me or the attitude with which he does it becomes a non-issue. Because what he's presenting is God's truth, and that changes my attitude and my disposition. So what we can do is look back at this and say, what if they had made the connection immediately in verse 21? What if they had made the connection between what God wanted done, what Moses and Aaron did? Would that have solved all of their problems immediately? Every problem just goes away then in verse 21? Not at all. No, but what does it do? I'm sorry? Gives them the right perspective, yeah. It settles us down, it reduces conflict among each other, and it causes us to focus on, okay, now what? Are there times in our lives where God's requirements are difficult? We looked at one last Sunday morning. We'll look at another, Lord willing, at 10:45 today, where what God wants us to do is difficult. We're okay with that because it's what God wants. It's different if it comes from one of us. It's different if I dream something up or if you dream something up. But when it comes from God, our perspective is different. And we have a certain respect and a desire to figure out how to do it. Now, would they still be full of questions if they recognized this was God's doing instead of Moses and Aaron's doing? You bet. The question still remains, how are we going to do this? How are we going to accomplish this? Don't know how we're going to do this. That's another thing on my little list today is sometimes even when we understand this is God's will for us, this is what we need to do as Christians, as His people, it doesn't mean every question is answered. It doesn't mean every challenge is removed. It doesn't mean things are all of a sudden going to be easy. It just means our attitude becomes, how can I figure this out and how can I make this happen? One of the things in all of this is Moses and Aaron, and then all of the people. Sometimes it's good for us to remember that the people didn't like the result, but neither did Moses and Aaron. That wasn't what they wanted to have happen. In fact, Moses is pretty upset about the whole thing in verse 22, isn't he? After the exchange with the Hebrews in verse 21, Verse 22, Moses returned to the Lord and said, I don't know how this worked. I don't know if Moses walked off muttering to himself, if he sat down somewhere under a tree and formally prayed. I don't know how the exchange went. But Moses said to the Lord, not, things are going great, thank you. Not, I appreciate your input. He didn't say that. Moses did not say, thanks for delivering the people. He didn't say that. Moses said, why have you brought harm to this people? Why did you ever send me? Why did you put me in this position? Why are you doing this? One of the things I think maybe we miss sometimes, and the Psalms help us with this a lot, especially the Psalms of David, is it's okay to admit to God, even in question format, why is this happening? I don't know why this is happening. I don't know how to deal with this. I don't know what to do here. That's okay. What Moses did here is not disrespectful to God. There were times when David in the Psalms would pray to God and say, I don't understand what's happening. My enemies are all around me. Things are closing in on me. I don't know what to do. God didn't say, well, you shouldn't feel that way. You shouldn't have those emotions or those attitudes. He didn't say that. End result is he did say, trust in me, I have a plan, just like he did with Moses. But we need to understand as Christians that sometimes we don't understand everything, and we don't see how it's all going to work out, and we don't know what the end result's going to be, and we don't know how we're going to get from where we are to where we need to go. We just don't know sometimes. That's okay. God does, and he doesn't have to tell us every single thing about it. I love that point because here God already knows how this whole thing's going to go. You ever thought about that? God knows how the Exodus is going to go. He already knows the Red Sea's coming up. Moses has no idea. He doesn't even think about the Red Sea. They're nowhere near the Red Sea right now. God already knows about that. God already knows about the spies as they're going to go in and look over the land and say what a marvelous land it is, but we can't take it. God knows about all of that. Moses has no idea about that. God already knows. He knows how the plagues are going to work out. So as Moses goes to him and says, why have you brought harm to this people? Why did you send me here? Verse 23, ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name. That is significant, to speak in your name. That is to say what you told me to say. Ever since I did that, he has done harm to this people, and you have not delivered your people at all. Is that true? Absolutely true. Moses is right. But what Moses is missing is what we sometimes miss. Just because I can't see it doesn't mean God isn't doing it. Right? Does anyone in here have any example you want to share with the group about just because I can't see it doesn't mean God isn't doing it? Anybody in here ever have any kind of circumstance that now looking back on, you can see that God was actually doing something, but in the moment, you didn't have that assurance. You had the hope, you had the faith, but you didn't have the assurance. You ever had a circumstance work out like that? That I didn't know that you were doing it, but you were actually doing it, whatever it was. Anybody? Oh, come on. Isn't it everything? Yeah, I could, being really honest, I can go back to every major event in my life. I did not know about certain decisions that I made and physical moves that I made and things like that. I did not know how all that was going to go. I didn't have assurance about how things were going to work out, but God knew. He was involved in that process. It gets back to, do we trust Him or do we not? Do we really believe that He is God or do we not? Do we believe He cares about us or do we not? Moses' perspective in 22 and 23 is, I've done what you said to do, but you haven't done anything. That's essentially what he says. Yes, ma'am.
I have one.
Go ahead.
Okay, so when Ashton was before he was 2, he had cancer. What you may not have known is that I could see something was changing in his eye. It was starting to change color. So I made a few phone calls to doctors, and they said, well, people can have different changes in eye color. It can happen. So when he woke up that one day and he could open his eye, then because I've gotten him eye drops and different things,
comes in and he looks at Ashton and he kind of looked again. He goes, well, that can't be right. So he looked again. He's like, okay, that can't be right, because they were taking pressure in his eye, like a pressure. Apparently, his was higher than what they had ever seen. And he kept going, well, there's something wrong with this machine. I need to go get another one. So he came back. Well, all this time I'm thinking something's wrong. So he leaves. I called James, which I've never done in all the years that we've had so many kids and doctors. And I said, you need to stop what you're doing. Something is wrong. I need you to come to the doctor, the eye doctor. So he didn't say anything. He just came real quick. So Dr. Knox came in and he said, I'm going to send you to Children's. And I think he has a cataract. And I said, wait, before you say anything else, I'm going to really be plain about this. And I want you to really think about this, where you want to send us. Because I just, and he goes, you know what? Just give me a minute. I'm going to go make some phone calls. So he left. And James and I sat there and prayed. And we said, whatever he says when he comes in is what we're going to do. Because we will know that is from the Lord. So he comes in, he goes, I changed my mind. I'm going to send you to Dean McGee in Oklahoma City. Well, I'm like, I haven't worked with Dean McGee, I only in Oklahoma City. So we're like, okay. He goes, we'll get you in there in 2 days. I made some phone calls. So we get going, there's a blizzard, a true blizzard. We're driving 15 miles an hour going to Oklahoma City in a blizzard. And everybody's closed. So I'm praying all the way that somebody will be here because it's a blizzard. So we get in there and he stayed. And he waited for us. And so he came in and he looked and he said, well, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is I think Ashton might live. But the bad news is they're going to have to take his eye. And of course, I, being the strong person I was, threw myself on the floor and started wailing because I just was so shocked. But he goes, let me go make some phone calls. And he came back and he said, I'm going to send you to St. Jude because I think there's only one doctor in the country who can help Ashton. And he's at St. Jude. And I just left there 2 weeks ago. And I have all their phone numbers on my phone list. And so they were able to get us exactly where we needed to be. There's only 2 doctors in the entire country that could have diagnosed Ashton, and one of them was there. And not only that, a lot of people questioned us along the way, well, why are you going to Children's? Why are you going here? And I just kept saying, because we prayed, and God is sending us there, and I have to believe there's a reason. And had we gone anywhere else, he probably wouldn't be here today, because they would have treated him in a way that would be normal. But his cancer is the only one they've ever seen that's ever been documented in the history of mankind. Believe it or not, this kid right here is the only. That's hard to grasp sometimes. But God knew where we needed to go. He knew where we needed to be. He knew there was only one person that could do it, and he was able to do it.
I love that, and I appreciate you sharing that, because that's the thing we're doing as believers. And that's what faith is. It is trusting God. It doesn't mean everything's going to work out every time the way we want it to. But it means we recognize that He knows and we don't. And there are situations where we really have no idea about what to do, and we by faith do our best and trust Him. That's where Moses and Aaron were, and that's where you and I are from time to time. I am convinced that probably most of the issues, big issues like that we recognize would be health-related issues. But there's a whole host of smaller things that are not quite as consequential by themselves, but that add up and build up over a lifetime to matters of great consequence. And it is not always that God gives us exactly what we want out of it. It is that He has a plan and He's working the plan. Appreciate you sharing that, Debbie. And I want us to think about how, from our perspective, we have to trust that He is God. Now, before we wrap up, we've got like 4 minutes, so we're out of time really. But before we wrap up, and in view of what Debbie shared, let's look at the first part of chapter 6. After Moses says, I've done my part and you've done nothing. After Moses makes that remark, Verse 1, then the Lord said to Moses, now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. It's as if God is saying, I was just setting you up. I just wanted to set up a circumstance so you would realize you're not in control, so you would realize you cannot do it by yourself, and your people cannot do it by themselves. I just wanted to be sure everybody knew who was who in all of this. Pharaoh's running the show, you're not, but there's me. So he says, now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For under compulsion he will let them go, and under compulsion he will drive them out of his land. God spoke further to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. And then he goes through the things that indicate he's the Lord. Just think about that. God says to Moses, yeah, I know. From your perspective, it looks like I've done nothing. But what I've actually done is exactly what needed to be done. I have set it up and arranged it so that real good can come, lasting good can come. Doesn't mean every time it's going to work out our way. It means God is in control of things, and he will work them out in a way that is best. And it is our job to trust that, to believe in that. And when one of us or some of us are struggling with that, it is our job to encourage each other that way. Sometimes the Israelites missed that. They were really good at ganging up when it was time to be against somebody. Not real good at ganging up when it was time to help and encourage people. We need to be better at that as Christians. We're way out of time. Thank you so much for participating. We'll continue over the course of the next few weeks to look at some things in the Exodus.